Hello my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys, and welcome back to r/MaliciousCompliance, where in today's episode, OP's boss learns the hard way that you should never mess with your employees' paychecks. As always, the stories are super satisfying, so sit back, kick your feet up, and enjoy. Subscribe if you haven't, and with that said, we're diving in. Okay, so this is a long story, but I hope it's worth it in the end. In my last relationship, I lived with my husband Danny in a duplex owned by his mother Donna. We lived on one side and his mom and brother lived on the other side. Now, Donna was a very abusive person. She took great joy in belittling and tormenting me every chance she got. And she always took extra pride in herself if she succeeded in making me cry. My ex-husband is a professional cook, and he would often prepare enough food for his mother in addition to ourselves. On occasions when I would do the cooking, she also expected to be served dinner as well. One thing I often made was chili. Both my ex and his mother loved my chili, but both liked their chili on the spicy side. Now, I never made my chili spicy, as I do have a sensitive stomach. My ex would add hot sauce to his serving, and that was that. But Donna would complain endlessly about chili not being spicy, even going so far as to demand that I make the next batch of chili spicy for her. I told her I wasn't gonna do that because I wouldn't be able to eat it. She essentially told me that what I wanted didn't matter, since she had been gracious enough to allow me to live in her home. I told her if she wanted it spicy, she could add hot sauce to it like my ex did, or she could make her own damn chili. So the next time my ex told her that I was making chili, she comes over while I was making it, and she watches me like a hawk. She was demanding I add this, that, etc, etc. I told her I'd be making my chili the way I wanted to, and that she could go home and wait for it to be done, or find something else to eat. So she left, and I continued tending to my chili. Now my ex is somewhat of a hot sauce connoisseur, and he's never met a hot sauce that was too spicy for him. So the previous Christmas, I bought him a bottle of Carolina Reaper puree. When the chili was ready, he asked me to make a Tupperware container of chili for his mom so he could take it over to her. So like the good little wifey I was, I put the chili into the container with a heaping tablespoon of Carolina Reaper. I then mixed it up really well, added some shredded cheese on top, and closed it up, ready to be delivered next door. My ex delivered the chili and we sat down to our meal. We had just finished approximately 30 minutes later when his phone rang. Now my ex liked to have his conversations on speaker and I was glad of it this time. I hear, Danny, something's wrong. This chili, oh, it's burning me up. What did your wife do to this chili? My ex looks at me confused and I just shrug. He then says, she didn't do anything to it, it's just her normal chili. What did you add to it, Mom? She says to him, I added sriracha, but there's no way it should be hot like this. That hateful bitch did something to my chili, Danny, I'm gonna kill her. My ex tells her to calm down as she's overreacting, and she's screaming, I want her out of my house, Danny. She then hung up. My ex looked at me and asked, hey, did you do something to her chili? To which I smiled sweetly and said, the bitch wanted it spicy, and it's effing spicy. So there were no real repercussions from this other than being cursed out by her. Also, she was perfectly fine, and she never asked for my chili again, so bonus. Guys, I've said this once and I have to say it again. One of the most important rules of life is never ever mess with people who handle your food. And also, I enjoy sriracha as much as the next person, but in chili, really? But hey, to each their own, right? So during halftime at our local high school's football game, we went to the concession stand to get some food. Now, I didn't think it would be an issue because we were sitting with a group of people, but I laid my stuff out on the bleachers anyway. However, when we get back, we were met with a group of middle-aged people and a rather elderly lady sitting in our spot and my stuff tossed to the side. Now, usually I'm an extremely nice person, to the point that people are always yelling at me for being too nice and getting taken advantage of. But this week I've had enough. I was sick of being taken advantage of and dealing with people's, bull crap. So I stood there for a minute and said, this is our seat. You took our seat and that's extremely rude. The leader of the middle-aged ladies, who we'll call Karen, snaps back and said, they said no one was sitting here, so sorry, move somewhere else. Now clearly they made absolutely no attempt at moving, to which my husband said, yeah, you really look sorry. Karen then motions behind her and said, there's room back there. However, there was only one small section of bleacher directly behind her and between our entire group. I thought about it for a second and realized that arguing wasn't gonna get us anywhere, and it would just make me look bad. So I smiled to my husband and said, "Okay, let's squeeze in here." It was like he could read my mind in that second and knew exactly what was about to happen. So my husband and I, along with our 4 children, squeezed right up behind and beside Karen. Now, as anyone with kids, or anyone who's ever seen kids, you can probably see where this went. My kids were running on pure sugar, adrenaline, and school spirits after a long first week of school. And I made special sure that the youngest, a 6-year-old boy, sat right next to me, directly behind Karen and her large bleacher chair she had set up. Did I also mention that the reason we're sitting up front in the first place is because kids usually can't sit still? My kids like getting as close as possible to see the game, but also enjoy coming back to us to sit and talk for a bit. In any other situation, I would have made sure my kids were respectful and courteous to those around us. I would have put a stop to the screaming when our team scored, the jumping up and down, chanting with the cheerleaders, and running between us and the fence, but not this night. Now, I think it took Karen all of 5 minutes to realize her mistake. The cringing from the screams right behind her, the leaning from side to side when they were standing at the fence blocking her view, and my 6-year-old happily swinging his feet back and forth, oblivious that he was repeatedly kicking the back of her seat. Karen was getting audibly and visibly annoyed from it all, and she kept giving me dirty looks, as if to say, "Hey, control your children," where I'd just shrug and look at my husband and say, "Hey, I did try to tell her." One by one, those in Karen's group start to leave. But Karen held on the longest, and she still only made it about half an hour before she decided that she couldn't take it anymore and left. Now, I'm not a complete monster. I made sure my kids didn't bump or bother anyone, and I even asked Karen to move her purse that she put behind her before it got stepped on. But that was met with a scoff. Maybe next time though, Karen's gonna think twice before stealing seats from kids, because she might get more than she bargained for by inviting us to squeeze in behind her. Honestly guys, this person said it the best. If you act like an uncivilized barbarian, you get treated like one. You don't get to steal someone's seats and then appeal to norms of polite behavior. I agree 100% guys. Everything aside, the kids probably had a frickin' blast, jumping up and down, screaming, running around, with the parents not stopping them in public. So pretty much the ultimate weapon against an entitled Karen might be annoying kids. Oh, and cameras. You can't forget cameras. So this story happened 15 years ago, relatively early in my career as a web developer and software engineer, so some details are not remembered precisely. Also, the names are changed, etc, etc. Anyway, I thought I landed a dream job at a small media company that had gone all in on digital media and marketing a few years prior and started to land some big clients. Think NHS, etc. The team comprised of 2 owners, who we'll call Jeff and Nige. Jeff was the light-hearted, approachable, and more tech-oriented member of the double act. Nige was the straight man, less approachable, and less likely to join us in any social antics, but ultimately a seemingly decent guy and the main driver of the business. In addition, there was an office manager, James, who is also Nige's other half, and Rachel, an office assistant, and a good friend of Nige. The rest of the workforce made up the media team, which comprised of a senior and junior designer, a senior and junior developer, and me, another senior developer. So what made this a dream job for me at the time was, on top of the fact they were doing some great work with what was at the time cutting-edge technology, it was an overall great place to be. There was flexible working hours, lots of holidays, and lots of social events. So to give you a better idea, most lunchtimes, Jeff and the media team would all go out to lunch together, or play a FIFA tournament, or go to the pub and mob on a new idea, etc. So most important for the story is every Friday, we would all finish an hour early, at 4 p.m. instead of 5 p.m., and we would all go to the pub and have a couple of drinks together. It was a very open place to work at the time, and the 2 owners were clear on how they expected the business to expand, and our future positions within such an expanded company. Basically, all the guff any potential employer peddles when you interview, but we were actually doing it and living it. They were receptive to new ideas or different ways of doing things, and regularly included us in sales meetings so we could see the direction the company was going in. Everybody who worked there was excited, and I honestly thought that I'd be there for the rest of my career. Things, however, change. As time went on, the company became more successful, and with the more success came more recognition, more clients, more money, and then more greed. Now, I won't go into too much detail, but a couple of years after starting there, this once open and relaxed workplace had become hell. There were no longer flexible hours. You had to be in at 8:50 a.m. to get ready at your machine, and you weren't allowed to power down until 5 p.m. the earliest, unless you'd been asked to stay late to churn out more work, which was unpaid. There was also no more lunchtime socials, and there was a lunchtime timetable that stated who could go for lunch and when, so we could no longer take lunch together. Despite the growing workload of more complex and larger websites, there were no new members even added to the team. Even when other developers left, no replacement was found. On top of this, despite the growing workload and shortening deadlines, promises of raises and bonuses never came to fruition, which was especially galling when coupled with the fact that both owners were by now getting a new car every 6 months. Nigel also made it clear that with the success of the company, his plan was to sell it at the ripe age of 45 and semi-retire to a life of traveling, writing, and photography, without a second thought for the rest of us. The business was now being run in such a way that allowed the owners to line their pockets with as much cash as possible, while also making it look like a good takeover prospect. The only perk that remained was the 4 p.m. Friday finish, which by this time, instead of all going for a drink together, we just went home early. Morale was low. On one Friday afternoon, Nigel, Jeff, and James went to visit a prospective client. Rachel was off for some reason, which left nobody in charge of the office. So expecting the usual early finish at 4 p.m., but not having received any word from the owners, we hung on. At around 4:50 p.m., with nothing else to do, we collectively decided, you know what, F it, let's lock up and go home. Apparently at about 4:51 p.m., Nigel tried to call the office, probably to tell us to go home, but of course we already left. So Monday morning, every one of us was called to the main office and given a tongue lashing. We were also told that a planned upcoming social was now cancelled. Now it probably was already anyway, but why not use that as punishment? They also said that our wages were going to be docked for leaving early. Now, here in the UK, it's naughty to make deductions from salary unless it's for some legally mandated reason, such as taxes, national insurance, student loans, etc. Or unless the employee has given explicit written permission, so I didn't think that last threat would actually happen. I didn't have to wait long to find out as we were paid weekly. But sure enough, that Friday, there was a deduction from my wages as well as everybody else on the team. I approached the owners about it, but I was basically given the same speech as on Monday morning previous. Law has always been a particular interest of mine. It still is. And while I'm not a lawyer or any kind of expert, I know enough to stand up for myself and those around me. And so, with the backing of the rest of the media team, I sent what may be considered a notice before action just prior to leaving on Friday. The notice before action was a formally worded email to both owners, stating my grievance, the illegal deduction from salary, and my proposed resolution, which is the repayment of the deducted salary in our next wage, along with a formal apology to everybody on the team. Failure would mean the engagement of legal services. On Monday morning, the owners arrived late, and instead of Nigel's customary visit to the media room to ask how we were, aka making sure we were slaving away, they both retreat directly to their office and shut the door. This was shortly followed by an email to all of us stating that due to my threat, and after taking legal advice, they had been told to cease direct communication with any of us until the matter was resolved. The resolution they wanted was a full apology by me to them, and the agreement that salary should remain deducted. Any communication should be via email. Now, I'm pretty sure they hadn't had any legal advice on the matter. Or if they had, it was BS. Firstly, a decent solicitor would have told them that they were idiots for doing what they did and to give the money back and apologize. Secondly, because the entire point of a notice before action is to try to find a resolution prior to taking legal action, in closing up shop in this manner, they are practically forcing a legal engagement. My belief is that they were simply calling my bluff, and they didn't believe that I would take this any further. They reinforced this by adding to their email that any further communication about deduction from our wages would need to come from my legal representation. Now, I of course was not bluffing, and I complied with their request. Now, what the owners didn't know was that a member of my family was not only educated in employment law, but also a union rep at another company. So by the end of the day, a legally drafted letter arrived on the owner's desk, laying out the illegalities of what happened, as well as the expected timeline of events going forward. Within 30 days, we were to have had a formal meeting between the owners and myself, with me being entitled to legal representation present in that meeting, and with the expectation that my demands in the NBA were to be met, as they had no defense. Should that not occur, this would be going to tribunal or maybe even full court, with the company liable for expenses. It was a slam dunk, so they would end up with a relatively hefty bill. So instead of folding as I expected them to do, this led them to double down on their stupidity. Their door was permanently shut, with very little direct communication between the whole media team and the owners, with it being mostly done by email or via Rachel and James. So at this point, Rachel and James, who were obviously on good terms with Nige, became openly hostile towards me. For example, Rachel would make everybody in the office coffee in the morning, and now it was everybody except me, and she made sure that I knew it. Seemingly, neither the owners nor Rachel and James seemed to know or understand that I had the full backing of the rest of the team. They didn't have the know-how or the will to fight it themselves, but they were aware of the downhill direction in the working environment and that my actions were preventing the owners from further taking the piss in the future. Now the environment had become exceptionally toxic and nobody wanted to be there. So everyone, including myself, sought new employment. If I remember correctly, an extension was requested and granted, but the deadline for the aforementioned meeting came and went, so my rep sent another formal letter to my employees stating that we were going to tribunal. It's also stated that I would be leaving the company immediately, and I would be claiming constructive dismissal due to the actions of the owners, James, and Rachel, which had all been logged over the previous weeks. Receiving all this was the last straw, and their resolve was broken. An apology was sent via email along with the promise that the money would be returned in our next paycheck. I had had enough, however, and I immediately handed in my notice, which I believe was 4 weeks. I hadn't found another job, but I decided to move to the city anyway and go freelance. Before my notice period ended, the junior designer also handed her notice in, also to go freelance. And within a few months of me leaving, the junior developer and the senior designer had done the same. The business owned by Jeff and Nige was essentially dead, with many of their existing clients seeking us out to continue doing work for them on a freelance basis. I learned that Jeff and Nige eventually had a falling out, and Jeff resigned as a director and became CTO at another tech company. Nige renamed and rebranded the old company and attempted to carry on somehow, but to this day, the examples of work on their webpage are still the ones made 15 years ago. Most of them aren't actually his clients anymore or are defunct. I also later learned, as we all suspected, that Jeff wanted nothing to do with the wage deduction, etc., although I'm not sure how hard he fought against it. Although I've not physically met them since the day I left, I'm connected to everybody in the media team, and they're all doing well. Jeff also reached out a few years later, and he's doing well too. As for Nige, James, and Rachel, I have no idea. Rachel was close to retirement anyway, so I guess she was reasonably fine. Looking at the public details of the business Nige now owns, it's clear that none of them makes any money, and his travel and photography blogs stopped being updated a few years ago. Nige's plans to retire early and travel the world are probably now permanently on hold. And you're probably wondering, what was the amount deducted from our wage in which Nige lost his business and planned future for? £6.80, which is about $9. Yeah, definitely should have paid up and apologized. But hey, this is what happens when owners think they're too high and mighty, guys. Sometimes they encounter someone who isn't afraid of them and will take action against them. And in this case, it cost them their frickin' business. So I worked in a pub that was really close to the train station in my city. It happened to be the cheapest place to get drunk before moving on to the clubs, and it was close enough to loads of other bars. We would be stacked to the rafters from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m., full of absolute drunk heads. So on this one particular evening, it was super busy, and I was collecting empty glasses. I was under a lot of pressure from my boss to get rid of the empties because they were stacking up on every table. So I was swooping around, grabbing up finished drinks, dancing around the drunks like a poorly paid ninja. I then get to this one table, and there's a drink on the side that has like a dribble left in it, and I mean a dribble. So I thought to myself, it's going. The lager's tepid, and the drink's probably been abandoned. So I collect the glass. Now, before I could turn around, I was accosted by what I can only describe as a big, hairy man, because that's what he was. He was also very drunk, very angry, and he loomed over me and said, "You gonna get me another drink? You threw away my pint." To which I replied, no, and attempted to move on with my life. So at this point, the guy grabs me, stops me from leaving, and I start to see his crew gather around him, all equally pissed off that I had thrown away what little sip he had left. Clearly I had disturbed the alpha buffoon. He then leered in closely and said, "Do you want to take this outside?" To which I replied, "Yeah, let's go, let's take this outside." Now I'm not a fighter. If you saw my body, you'd know that I was built to run away. So I put down the glass in my hand and casually beckoned for him and the rest of the crew to follow me outside, flexing my neck muscles and pumping my twiggy arms. I then walked out the door and watched as the whole gang of idiots flowed onto the street outside, expecting a fight. When the last idiot passed the threshold, I turned casually to the bouncers and said, "Don't let these boys back in, they just threatened to attack me." And with that, I sauntered back to work, leaving the group of idiots stuck outside looking very upset. I caught a last glimpse of the one particular alpha, who did look pretty confused, trying to work out what had just happened to him. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our /malicious compliance. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the stories today. If you missed the last episode on the channel, I'll link it right here. An entitled Karen calls 911 on OP, accusing him of stealing his own car. Because you know what? People like him aren't allowed nice cars. It's such a crazy story, so go check it out if you haven't. And myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.